Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. We're admitting the last participants of the summer school in the module implementing cancer prevention and early detection. And today we have a public event online. And I will just ask the participants as much as possible to write their questions in the chat. That is valid for the Zoom participant and for participants or viewers, shall I say, on YouTube. Today, we have a lot of contributors. So if you can, as much as possible, put the name of the person you are addressing the question, this would facilitate the work of the chair today. Our chair is Dr. Béatrice Lobby-Secrétan, head of the IARC handbooks program and deputy head of the evidence synthesis and classification branch at IARC. And I am pleased to give you the floor, Béatrice. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to share the most recent information on alcohol and tobacco, the two devils of public health. We try to find a catchy title, and you'll discover throughout the different sessions why this can be indeed named to this in this way. Today we have a number of guest speakers, Dr. Tanya Cavalcante, Dr. Robert Spranson, Ms. Marion Catlin, Dr. Faisal Itsan Mustafa, Dr. Kate Allen, and Dr. Pudubu Sumanasekara. Today's agenda will first present the data on tobacco, and then followed by the series of question and answer. And then we'll have a series of presentation on alcohol, again, followed by the series of questions. The questions can be addressed to any of the presenters, but we will have a session after each of the two sessions, so it's easier for each to answer. And I think following that, we'll now move into the first presentation on tobacco. So I want to welcome Dr. Tatiana Cavalcante, a former coordinator of National Tobacco Control Policy and the National Cancer Institute from the Ministry of Health in Brazil. And she will present a presentation on Smoke-Free Brazil, the long and steep path of challenges posed by the tobacco industry. Dr. Cavalcante, the floor is yours.
Just let me hear.
Yes.
Oh, thank you for the kind invitation for the coordinators of IARC Summer School. And I'd like to greet everyone from Brazil. And I'm going to speak a little, very briefly, on this big experience of Brazil, how becoming a smoke-free country. My presentation will be split into brief parts: Brazil, a brief context of national tobacco control policy, and the experience itself with the approval of national smoke-free legislation. Brazil is a challenging country. Brazil is a mega country. We have, as you may know, we have 220 million inhabitants spread in 26 states, more than 5,000 municipalities. Brazil is also the second or third, depending on the year, largest producer of tobacco. And this gives tobacco industry that coordinate this production economic and political power to interfere in tobacco control in Brazil, unfortunately. Brazil became member state of WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in 2005. Since then, we have been enhancing the implementation of its measures. And here we can see in this chart some of the results of this policy. For example, here we have the prevalence of smoking in Brazil that has decreased. Sorry, I'm just advanced one slide. Here we can see the smoking prevalence in Brazil is steady decrease. Since 2006, we have 15.7% of the population, adult population, were smokers. And in 2001, this figure decreased to 9.1. So many things happened here to push this decrease, because Brazil has another data before this that showing decrease, but I choose this chart in order to show this series of data. And Brazil has already an important reduction in the exposure, in the prevalence of exposure to secondhand smoke. Here we have a data of the proportion of non-smokers who said that they were not exposed anymore, or they were exposed to secondhand smoke in their workplaces. Here we can see in 2009, 12.1% of the smokers, non-smokers, said that they were exposed to secondhand smoke in their workplaces. In 2021, this number decreased to 5.4%, showing that something happened in this period that caused this change. I'm sorry, my presentation is not going on. Okay, this result has been translated into reduction of death rates from lung cancer, COPD, and cardiovascular disease. This is a study that very interesting that shows it very clearly. But we must be realistic. Tobacco control is a policy that faces strong opposition by tobacco industry. If you look at the data, though tobacco control policies have made progress in Brazil and all over the world, the rate of reduction of smoking prevalence has not been proportional to the severity of the smoking pandemic. Today, we have 8 million people dying from tobacco-related disease every year. In Brazil, 165,000 people die from tobacco-related disease every year. And it's important to remember that during the process of negotiation at FCTC, the countries, the governments recognize tobacco industry interference as part of the determinants of tobacco pandemic and its consequence. So for this reason, we agreed to have measures to protect tobacco control policies from tobacco industry interference, Article 5.3 and its guidelines. Important to know, talking about the issue of smoke-free legislation in Brazil. In 2007, FCTC published the first guidelines with best practice to protect from exposure to secondhand smoke. The principles, evidence-based principles said that time, and it's always, there is no safe level of exposure to tobacco smoke. Threshold value of toxicity from secondhand smoke should be rejected. In solutions like ventilation, air filtration, and the use of designated smoking areas do not protect against exposure to secondhand smoke. So for this reason, in 2007, in Brazil, we already had federal legislation prohibiting smoking in enclosed public place, but allowing smoking designated areas, separation of smoking areas inside enclosed public places. So in 2008, the federal government presented a bill of law proposing a total ban on smoking in enclosed public places. That means eliminating allowance to smoke in designated areas. This started a huge public dispute. In one side, tobacco industry made important movement of opposition through groups. Association of Bars and Restaurants, ABRASEL, was the most vocal of the front groups. Here on the on this bottom, we can see the website of ABRASEL, sponsored by British American Tobacco and Philip Morris. They lobbied in the National Congress. They catched support from some legislators to block the formal process of appreciation of the Bill of Law in the National Congress. The arguments of economic losses were very strong. Violation of freedom of choice and human rights were also the arguments. They launched the campaign Courtesy of Choice in order to constrain the ones that were advocating for smoke-free legislation. They tried to disqualify scientific evidence, and they litigated. We are going to see a little more on that. By the side of the public health, we had the evidence-based guidelines for FCTC Article 8, health as a human right. We used this argument. Bar and restaurants workers' right to breathe pure air. And we used as well the occupational protection laws, the obligation of the employers to protect the health of the employees, and economic studies showing that there was no such impact on profits in bars and restaurants. And the slogan of this campaign was 100 smoke-free environments is everyone right. It's one very important strategy. It was the coalition between institutions of the government and non-governmental organization. We formed a real task force to educate, to inform, to mobilize the media, and to pressure the legislators. But what happened? What happened? There was in federal level a competition of bills of law in National Congress. When one senator started to push the bill of law proposing a total ban of smoking in enclosed public place, immediately another senator, induced by tobacco industry, obviously presented another competing bill of law proposing the maintenance of smoking designated areas, another measure that would even worse the current tobacco control legislation at that time. And very surprisingly, what happened in Brazil, the states started in between 2008 and 2010 to present bills of law. São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro and Paraná started this process to proposing in advance a total ban in smoking in enclosed places. And they were followed by other states, but tobacco industry reacted as well. They started to make a kind of convincing the legislators from other states to present bills of law to maintaining smoking designated areas. And there was a huge competition in the states level as well. And the tobacco industry, the states that adopted 100% smoke-free legislation, they litigated, but it was later dismissed by Supreme Court. São Paulo, the good example from São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro paved the way for the national smoke-free legislation. São Paulo state make a very important strategy, not only to approve, but to implement, to inspect compliance of bars and restaurants. And finally, in 2011, the National Congress of Brazil approved the federal legislation banning smoking, total ban of smoking in enclosed places. But I'd like just to call your attention for some point here that's very important for tobacco control, alcohol control. The pressure of tobacco industry delayed the approval to the enforcement for almost 3 years. If you look backward, we started this process in 2007. So there is a huge delay in the process. Okay, it's a victory, but it's not so, the speed is not so proportional to the severity of this. So finally, I just to make just some few remarks. Smoke-free legislation in Brazil is an example of how to activate science into policy. We are activists. real activism. We should transform science, evidence-based, into policy, because if the translation of science into policy, public policy needs strong social engagement to overcome to overcome the, I think that my time finished, to overcome the tobacco industry resistance. And Article 5.3 is a key measure, a cross-cut measure that protect all other measures from tobacco industry interference. Thank you so much, and sorry for taking a little more time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavalcante. It's always impressive to see the strength of the tobacco industry in being able to push back the laws and how they can delay the enforcement of what in 10 years would be total common sense. I'd like now to invite Dr. Robert Branson. Dr. Robert Branson is an associate professor in Business Economics School of Management and Tobacco Control Research Groups at the University of Bath. And his presentation today will be tobacco industry profitability and the challenges of taxing tobacco products. Dr. Branson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I hope you can both see my slides and hear me okay. I see a few nods, so that's a good sign. As you just heard from the introduction there, I'm an economist at the University of Bath, and my research interest is exploring the taxation of tobacco products. And I always put the taxation of tobacco products in the context of the profitability that the industry is earning. And I think that's really important for people working on the ground or working in tobacco and cancer more generally to understand. And I'm sure that message will become clear as I go through my presentation with you today. Now, before I speak, let me just get to my next slide. As an academic, it is important that I declare my conflicts of interest, and I can basically say I don't have any conflict of interest. I don't take any money from the tobacco or the wider nicotine interest. But if you are interested in the funding we have received at the University of Bath, please do follow the links you can see on my slides there, which will tell you a bit more about our research centres and the fact that I own 10 shares in Imperial Brands, a tobacco company, purely for research purposes, so that I can attend their annual meeting and ask some awkward questions about their profitability and where they earn their money and so on. Now, as the title of my presentation implies, really the core of what I want to talk to you about is tobacco taxation, because the taxation of products like tobacco is one of the most effective ways of dealing with this problematic product that consumers are able to purchase in pretty much every shop on every street corner. Now, the whole point of tobacco taxation is that it increases the retail price. It makes tobacco products more expensive, and therefore it deters consumers from starting the habit of using tobacco products, but also encourages existing users of tobacco to quit. Now, we economists talk about the elasticity of products, and elasticity is the sensitivity that consumers have to changing in price. So you can see on my slide that tobacco normally has an elasticity in the region of minus 0.4 to minus 0.6. That is what we call inelastic. What it means is for a 10% increase in the retail price of tobacco, we would expect between 4 and 6% reduction in the sales of those products. So what that tells us is that firstly, price matters. Higher prices translate into lower product usage, and that comes with lots of wider benefits such as lives saved, etc. But from government's point of view, it means that higher taxes are expected to increase the tax revenue that governments get. So tobacco taxes are seen to be a win-win. They save lives because they deter tobacco use, but they also give governments money which they can use for a whole range of purposes, some of which, of course, could be to help consumers quit, to increase the effectiveness of these higher prices. The problem we face with tax, though, is that we need to tax tobacco products consistently so that it encourages smokers to quit rather than simply switch towards cheaper products. If a smoker moves from, say, factory-made cigarettes to fine-cut tobacco for rolling their own cigarettes, we're not really getting the full benefit because the health consequences of all combustion tobacco products are broadly the same, according to the medical studies that have taken place. So we need to make sure taxes are applied in a consistent manner so all products get more expensive, and hence there is this overall incentive for consumers to quit. If we don't do that, there is a danger that tobacco products are going to be continually used, and that can obviously not only lead to health consequences, but also can reduce government revenues. In this regard, my own research has shown some illustrations of this as a problem by looking at the European market for tobacco products. And in all member states of the European Union, roll your own tobacco or fine cut tobacco for making your own cigarettes at home is cheaper than using factory-made cigarettes. Now, I'm not going to go all through the statistics on this slide. I've put them there so you could have a look through in your leisure. But I think the point is that the savings that consumers can make are quite significant by switching the type of tobacco that they smoke. So, for example, in Ireland, my own country, you can save more than €5 or something in the region of $5 American if you switch from buying factory-made cigarettes to making your own cigarettes with fine-cut tobacco. That saving is at least €2 in at least 15 EU member states. So the savings are tremendous. The saving goes up to 80% when you look at the case of Estonia. That is problematic because consumers will respond to price differences in the same way they respond to tobacco getting more expensive. So we can see in Europe there have been great successes with factory-made cigarette sales dropping significantly from 780 cigarette sticks to just over 450 billion cigarette sticks. So a massive reduction in factory-made cigarette sales there. But at the same time, the sales of roll your own tobacco increased from 56 million to 79 million tons. So some of the benefits of the higher taxes and the other measures that have been taken have been offset because taxes have not been equivalized. So some smokers have switched to buying this cheaper roll your own product instead of quitting and taking the opportunity of higher tobacco prices to quit their deadly habits. So taxes are important, but we need to equivalize taxes on products so that consumers get this strong incentive to quit. Now here, when applying our taxes, we also need to be mindful of how the industry is going to respond to these higher taxes. We have done studies that show there are 6 broad strategies that the industry look to adopt in order to undermine the taxes or make the taxes as least impactful as they possibly can. Now, with just 10 minutes to talk to you, I don't have the opportunity to go through all of these 6 strategies in great detail. But the point is they are looking to use their pricing to make sure that consumers don't face this big, large increase in price, which is going to force them to think about whether they want to continue their deadly habit. It is about mitigating the impact of price changes so consumers don't feel that higher price and hence don't see the incentive of quitting. Here, I will show you this picture from my research that I think really typifies industry responses to these rules. So on the picture I've just added to my slide, you can see there is a regular cigarette on the right-hand side of the picture, and on the left-hand side is what the industry referred to as a leaf-wrapped cigarette. In other words, they got a standard cigarette, covered it with tobacco leaf so that it was technically cast as a cigarillo, a cigar. That meant it had lower taxation and wasn't subject to the same restrictive rules as cigarettes. So in this case, they could continue to use branded packaging. They could continue to use menthol flavoring. They could continue to have smaller 10-stick packs sold on the marketplace. So this was a response that the industry adopted to bypass taxation but also bypass other rules as well. So whenever we are talking about taxation, we need to be mindful of industry responses and their wider tax avoiding strategies so that taxes are as effective as they possibly can be. If the industry can avoid the taxation, it's going to cost the government money in lost tax revenue, but it's going to create wider cost to society because people are still going to use tobacco products and they are still therefore going to have the harm that those tobacco products create. Now here, I would encourage you to think about taxation in the context of the amount of money that the tobacco industry is making in terms of their profits. Simply put, manufacturing tobacco products is inordinately profitable. It is about profits like almost no other industry on the planet. As you can see from my slide here, in 2018, the most recent year for which I could find the data, the world's 6 largest cigarette manufacturers made a combined profit of more than 55 billion US dollars. Now, to put that in context, that is more profits than the Coca-Cola company, Pepsi, Nestle, Mondelez, FedEx, General Mills, Starbucks, Heineken, and Carlsberg collectively made, which is just 51 billion. Now, I'm sure some of those companies will be familiar to you. Companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, I'm sure, are pretty universal these days. But all of those other companies that I've listed make products that are global in reach. So Nestle makes chocolate, they make baby milk, they make powdered coffee. General Mills makes a whole variety of food stuff, from Jolly Green Giant tinned sweet corn to old El Paso Mexican sort of food that you can buy globally. So these are massive global companies with massive global brands, and yet they still make less profits than the tobacco industry. In actual fact, I've got 9 of those companies added together, and yet they still make less than the 6 largest cigarette companies. So we are dealing with an industry that makes vast profits. Not only are those profits large in totality, but they also make a large amount of money in each sale. So here you can see I've also got information on what are called profit margins. A profit margin is the difference between the money an industry gets to keep having sold its products and the portion of that is profits. In my country of residence in the UK, Imperial Brands makes a net operating profit margin of 70.5%. So in other words, for every £100 the company gets from selling its cigarettes, almost £71 of that are pure profit. So here we are talking about an industry that makes a lot of money selling products that cost very little to make, but which sell for relatively high prices. If you compare that sort of operating margin to the ones that were made by those other global comparator companies, we see that a typical range for them is an operating margin of 15 to 16%, but with some variety around that. So the low is 6.5% and the high for Coca-Cola is 26%. So you can see tobacco companies are making double, if not triple, the margin that these other large companies that are forming my comparators. And here we also need to remember that the profits are still mainly being driven by combustion tobacco products. Now, the point about those profits is that they give those tobacco firms the resources and the incentive to maintain the status quo. When you are making $55 billion in profit, you don't want to change anything. You want to continue to earn those profits going forward. So this is why we see them fighting tooth and nail all of the tobacco control measures that many governments are putting in. So we saw in our first presentation today how the industry was competing in Brazil to try and litigate against these smoking bans, for example. They do that because they want to keep selling cigarettes, because they want to keep making these vast profits. So we need to keep in mind these activities when we try to pass tobacco control regulation, but also more broadly when we hear the industry tell us anything. So we know, for example, whenever taxes are mentioned, the tobacco industry will say, oh, you don't want to put taxes up because then you'll have a big market for illicit tobacco. But actually, that's simply not true. We know that when taxes aren't increased by governments, the industry puts its own prices up to continue to make these large profits. We know there are many countries that have increased their taxes whilst at the same time the rate of illicit has gone down. And that is because illicit tobacco is an issue of enforcement. It is not directly driven by rates of taxation. So to finish, let me reiterate this point. We do not want to buy into the false narratives that the tobacco industry presents. We need to keep in mind the vast profits they are making, the incentives those profits provide, and hence we need to pursue policies like increased tobacco taxation that are win-win policies that give governments much needed tax revenue, but which also encourage smokers to give up their deadly habit and hence address the problems that are caused through tobacco usage. I think I'm out of time there, so apologies if I've gone over by a couple of minutes. Happy to receive any questions that the audience may have in once all of the speakers have been able to talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Branson. We actually well on time because we started a little early, and it's fascinating to hear how the tobacco industry is tricking us day in, day out, and from the early age until death, most likely, in many cases. With this, I'll now introduce our next speaker, which is Ms. Marion Catelin. She's the Executive Director of Alliance contre le tabac, or ACT, and she will present, the title of her presentation will be Revealing Big Tobacco's Human Rights Infringement in Public Awareness Campaigns, an Original Perspective to Denormalize Tobacco in France. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you again for the invitation. Yes, this is actually a bit long title of my presentation, and I will explain you what is exactly what meant by denormalizing tobacco in France and how actually big tobacco's children's rights infringement can help us to make smoking prevention in France. First of all, maybe I owe you a short introduction about what is denormalization of tobacco and its industry. Actually, this is prevention approach, quite innovative, developed in the early 2000s by the NGO, American NGO Truth Initiative, to renew the interest for tobacco control by assigning the smoking pandemic responsibility on the tobacco industry itself rather than on the smokers one. And the idea here is to change a bit the narrative about tobacco control. That is to say, we want to show here through this approach how the tobacco industry affects not only our health, of course, but also our society, our environment, economy, and also our rights and fundamental rights. So from this approach developed in the USA in the 2000s, at my organization, Alliance contre le tabac, the French coalition of tobacco control associations in France, we wanted to use this approach to try to change the perception of tobacco products in France, so that we can go faster in an in-game approach, that is to say, to make tobacco in-game socially acceptable. So how we make to denormalize tobacco by revealing big tobacco's children's rights infringement. We developed actually last year in 2022 a public awareness campaign called Change Their Future. And I will show you what was the communication plan. The objective of this campaign was, through an online petition, to invite at the time the presidential candidates, because it was presidential elections at the times. We wanted them to take 3 new measures to have the first tobacco-free generation by 2032. This is our governmental objective currently, and we wanted them to have more innovative measure to go further in this endgame approach. And then the secondary goal of this campaign was to inform the general public about the youth exploitation by the tobacco industry in France, but also in the rest of the world. And the target of this campaign was quite large. You will see we have some communication plan aimed at the youngest people from 16, but also the older people was concerned by this campaign through especially the petition. And we had this figure that was very important for our campaign. This figure comes out from our survey developed by the Pulse Institute. 9 out of 10 teenagers would like to live in a tobacco-free world. And this is really important for this campaign. So for this campaign, for this public awareness campaign, we had a large communication plan through, of course, PR strategy, but also then we had spots. We had a Snapchat lens. I will explain you what is it. We had also, of course, a press kit. We also had fly posting and billboards campaign. We had also media partnership and especially digital media partnership. But also we made influence marketing because the role of the influencer in this campaign is also very important to address our matters to the youngest people. For the petition, to push our measures to ban progressively the tobacco product sales in France, we collected almost more than actually 8,500 signatories, which was quite good for such kind of topic in France. And also concerning the digital coverage of this campaign, it was very massive because our ad spot collected them more than 2.8 million 100% completed views, which is a lot actually, because for such kind of spots, sometimes the completion of the view of the spot is not so high. So I will let discover now the spot of this campaign. Do you have the sound?
Yes, we do.
You do?
Yes.
Je suis l'industrie du tabac.
But can you see the
Personnellement,
video?
je ne fume pas,
Okay,
ni aucun des
because I
dirigeants qui
cannot see
contribuent à ma prospérité. Mon travail, c'est d'accoutumer les jeunes à la cigarette. Pourquoi? Parce que c'est avant 18 ans qu'on devient accro. Après aussi, mais c'est plus rare. Donc, statistiquement, il est très important que les gens se mettent à fumer dès le plus jeune âge. Ironie de l'histoire, ce sont aussi des enfants qui travaillent à la récolte du tabac dans nos exploitations du tiers-monde. Vous allez finir par croire que nous en avons après les jeunes, et vous aurez raison. Mais ce n'est pas par plaisir, c'est juste pour l'argent. Et de l'argent, nous en avons beaucoup. Et vous? Vous allez faire quoi pour nous arrêter? Une pétition?
Was the video really running? Because I cannot see the video.
No, I think it was probably on pause. Yes.
You don't see the video?
We
We
saw
have-
one image.
We
Just
heard
one
the
image,
sound.
but how is that possible? Because
We heard the sound, but the image was
yes,
fixed.
it's running right now. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can I release it again? Because
Yes,
I
sure,
think it's
sure. And maybe
it's
give
pity if you cannot. You heard it, but
yes, we
there
heard
is
it all
the
in
image.
French.
Yes, very
We heard it
important.
in French, so maybe you can summarize.
Yes, and there
the
is
content.
a subtitle actually on the
Okay,
video. So
okay,
I play it
please.
again. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
That's fine.
It
That's
should be
good. Yes.
better. Okay.
Je suis l'industrie du tabac. Personnellement, je ne fume pas, ni aucun des dirigeants qui contribuent à ma prospérité. Mon travail, c'est d'accoutumer les jeunes à la cigarette. Pourquoi? Parce que c'est avant 18 ans qu'on devient accro. Après aussi, mais c'est plus rare. Donc, statistiquement, il est très important que les gens se mettent à fumer dès le plus jeune âge. Ironie de l'histoire, ce sont aussi des enfants qui travaillent à la récolte du tabac dans nos exploitations du tiers-monde. Vous allez finir par croire que nous en avons après les jeunes, et vous aurez raison. Mais ce n'est pas par plaisir, c'est juste pour l'argent. Et de l'argent, nous en avons beaucoup. Et vous? Vous allez faire quoi pour nous arrêter? Une pétition?
It's clearer maybe with the image.
Yes.
Another tool we developed for the campaign was the Snapchat lens. It's like a filter that you use through the app Snapchat. It's a very famous app used by the youngest people, the 13 to 20 actually. And the aim of the lens was to change the warning messages on the packs, the cigarette packs, turning into little videos showing children exploiting in tobacco fields. And I'll let you discover what was exactly the concept of this lens.
Pour dénoncer ce qui se cache derrière le paquet, l'Alliance contre le tabac va directement s'adresser à la jeune génération dont l'industrie du tabac ne peut pas se passer pour continuer d'exister. Comment? En lui montrant ce qui se cache véritablement derrière les 3 milliards de paquets de cigarettes fumés en France chaque année. Grâce à un filtre Snapchat, nous avons changé les traditionnels visuels des paquets en les remplaçant par le témoignage d'enfants.
Seperti pusing, pegal-pegal, mual-mual.
Derrière chaque paquet, l'histoire d'un enfant exploité, déscolarisé, malade, à cause de l'industrie du tabac. Chaque paquet devient un nouveau moyen pour sensibiliser la nouvelle génération à ce business meurtrier. Continuons de partager ce filtre pour que chaque paquet soit le dernier.
That was, yes, our key tool of this campaign to make the youngest people aware of the fact that the tobacco industry is exploiting the youth. And we actually, that was quite a success because we managed to reach more than 1 million person and youngest people through the app. There was a lot of sharings and a good interaction times showing that our target saw the little films through this filter. We also made a media partnership through an online platform very well known in France called PREV. And in this video, we can saw a journalist, a former journalist, explaining how the tobacconist was actually in a very good relationship with the tobacco industry to sell tobacco products to the youngest people in France. And we managed to have also a lot of views. And also we made, as I said, influence marketing with this influencer. His name is Ben Never, and he's very famous by our young target. And we also had almost 300,000 views and very positive comments, interactions. And this activation is very important because we noticed that by the youngest people, it's better to have other people like rather than us, Alliance contre le tabac or experts in tobacco control, to talk to the youth. And it's easier when they see some famous people or stars explaining them with their own words our messages. So it was a good action too. For the global evaluation of the campaign shortly, because I'm not sure if I'm okay with the time, we managed to have 57 clippings. The context in terms of PR was special in France at the time because it was the beginning of the Ukrainian war and also the presidential election. So it was quite difficult to emerge in the press, but still there were good media coverage for this campaign, and also the politicians and the presidential elections was very receptive to this campaign, and we met actually all the presidential campaign teams. The main presidential campaign teams, and one of them included in its program the measure for tobacco-free generation by 2032. Shortly, the post-test results of the campaign. We can see that more than 72% of the respondents for this campaign liked the campaign, which was encouraging, and also that 80% of the respondents of our survey declared that the campaign informs them about the youth exploitation by the tobacco industry, which was our objective. And also interesting, 61% of the smoking respondents declared that the campaign encourages them to question their tobacco consumption. So we can see and we can say that tobacco denormalization is a complementary approach to address the tobacco epidemic, and that this approach could facilitate the emergence of tobacco generations, tobacco-free generations, and tobacco endgame in the near future. And thank you very much. And if you want more info, there is this QR code that you can scan, and we have more info on our website. And of course, I am pleased to answer your questions at the end of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maureen Catlin, and extremely impressive campaign. So we'll now welcome our last speaker for this session, Dr. Faizul Itzwan Mustafa. He's a public health specialist and Deputy Director of Non-Communicable Disease at the Disease Control Division, Ministry of Health in Malaysia. He will present the challenges of implementing the generational endgame in Malaysia. Dr. Faizul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So I would like to talk about the generational endgame and the challenges of implementation in Malaysia in the 5 minutes allocated to me. I'll be talking about just a background about the GEG, and I'll be focusing a bit more on the challenges that we face. Some of it have been touched by the earlier speaker, like Tanya, talking about interference from industry, and by Rob as well, about the issues surrounding impacts. So just as a concept, what is the end game for those unfamiliar with this terminology? There are 4 components to the end game. Firstly, decreasing smoking prevalence less than 5%. So Tanya, I was just looking at Brazil's trajectory. Well, that would be my dream trajectory, that going down, decrease in prevalence. Secondly, the end of the tobacco products commercial sale. Third would be the denormalization of smoking culture, and that had been touched by Marion. And fourth is the zero exposure of tobacco used to the children. Malaysia is a signatory of the WHO XCTC as well, and we are working hard to reduce the burden of tobacco. But what we have not really touched about is the latest challenge that we are facing right now, which is the e-cigarette. And these have been really challenging for a lot of countries, including Malaysia. And the end game target for Malaysia, we are looking at, and this is what we are been proposing. And unfortunately, we have not passed the final hurdle of endorsement by the government, as it were. We were really at the final stages, and I'll be focusing more about the challenges about reaching that stage. We are looking at banning the usage of tobacco products and electronic cigarettes for those born in the year 2007, right? So anyone below the age of were born before the year 2007, they still can use tobacco products, and electronic cigarette is allowable. That will be the key difference on top of all the other tobacco control measures that are already in place. So let's talk about the challenges of implementation in Malaysia. I'm just going to talk about these 7. You should not view this as standalone. They all interrelate to one another, right? And I would just like to maybe go back again to what have been mentioned by Tanya, for example, about the tobacco industry influence. I think this is a very significant challenge in implementing tobacco control measures because the industry have employed various tactics. Some of it have been mentioned, for example, Rob, using the argument about illicit cigarette. The other would be on the marketing strategies, targeting youth and lobbying against stricter regulations. And overcoming this challenge requires strong political will, and that will relate to my last point, and measures to counter industry interference. The second one would be the establishing and enforcing a robust tobacco control regulation. Yes, a lot of countries, including Malaysia, have control measures in place. However, enforcing it is a separate issue that needs to be focused on as well. So yes, while we have expertise to develop comprehensive laws and policies, such as increasing taxes on tobacco products, banning smoking in public places, implementing graphic health warnings, you would need adequate resources, effective enforcement mechanism, and continuous monitoring to ensure compliance. I'm glad the earlier speakers talked about public awareness and education as well, because you need to raise public awareness about the dangers of tobacco use and promoting tobacco cessation. Educating the public, particularly the young people, again, in the context of e-cigarettes, as well, particularly right now, on the health risks associated with tobacco and the benefits of quitting, and also for e-cigarettes specifically, talking about the use being a gateway to actual cigarette use and other drug use, and also the targeting of e-cigarette on populations, particularly in Malaysia, who would not normally start smoking, is very important. And developing effective health promotion campaigns and integrating tobacco education into school curricula are important steps. Tobacco affordability and making tobacco less affordable and illicit cigarette. I would just like to recap again the points made by Rob. I'm glad he went into a bit more detail about the issues surrounding taxes. Yes, tax is important, but ensuring that they are applied consistently. And in the case now with not just cigarillo, for example, as you use example, Rob, for e-cigarettes as well, where countries allowing the use of e-cigarettes is very important, because increasing tobacco taxes is an effective strategy to raise prices and discourage consumption. However, with the issues about inconsistent application and also not addressing the issue of illicit tobacco products, which I agree with you, Rob, it is an enforcement issue. It needs to be carefully considered. Number 5, the support for tobacco cessation and providing accessible and affordable tobacco cessation services is crucial for individuals who want to quit smoking. And in a lot of countries, including Malaysia, providing adequate resources to enable tobacco cessation programs to run effectively is also challenging. Lastly, second last, monitoring and evaluation. Marian just now, she showed us that the results of the evaluation of the program that is being run in France. This is important. Continuous monitoring evaluation is important because we need the data. For me, where I sit previously, so Beatrice, that was my earlier designation. Right now, I am sitting in a different position, but still NCD is an important issue for me. So we need regular evaluation data to allow policymakers to make informed decisions and to adapt strategies. And lastly, politics getting in the way. Public health is politics. Let's not kid ourselves, but public health should not be politicized. what is happening right now in Malaysia because of the way the government, makeup of the government right now. A lot of issues are being politicized, and unfortunately, health is one of the issues that is being politicized right now. I like the word that Tanya used, that we have to be activists. I think those working in the public health space, you are not just an activist. You need to be champions as well. You need to be influencers. I'll be talking about policy making and issues surrounding policy making when we meet, for the participants during the face-to-face class end of this month. And this is, for me, very challenging for all of us working in the public health space, and particularly challenging for us working in the tobacco control space. And I think with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Beatrice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa. So this was to complete the picture of all the facets of, I would say, tobacco control policies. And we now have 10 minutes for questions. And I'll start with the question for Robert Branston. How to deal with taxation of a variety of smokeless tobacco products which are not branded and are homemade?
Thank you for the question, Sabita, which I have been pondering since I read it in the chat. I mean, you've asked a very tough question, but a very important question too. Smokeless tobacco products are a real problem, and we know this in a variety of countries, and they are generally cheap. And as I said in my presentation, where there are cheap tobacco products available, it clearly makes tobacco more affordable for those just becoming initiated into the habit of using tobacco, but also makes taxation of other products like factory made cigarettes less effective, because existing smokers can simply trade down to the cheaper oral tobacco if buying cigarettes becomes prohibitively expensive. So I think firstly, it's really important that there are taxation on these oral products. The question is how best to do that. And as you've rightly pointed out, a lot of these products are homemade, which makes formal taxation of them very difficult. So in that regard, I would suggest trying to tax the inputs to those products. So for example, is there a way of taxing the tobacco leaf so that at least the inputs into those products get more expensive, and hence overall the products are becoming more expensive? So in an ideal world, you will tax the products in the same way as you tax other tobacco products, but in a practical sense, that's not always going to be possible, which is why taxing the inputs could be an effective second choice. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. So another question, this one is for Marianne Catlin from Patrick Idoko in Gambia. Are there any laws against selling cigarettes to children in France or in the EU? Is there political will to reduce the effect of secondhand smoke in France? I think that would be
thank you very much for the question. Yes, in France, we have actually strong regulations for the ban and the consumption of tobacco, for the selling and the consumption of tobacco products. We have the ban on selling tobacco products to people under 18. But the thing is that actually we have many surveys showing that actually the tobacconists, which are the only economical actors in France having the right to sell tobacco products, actually these tobacconists are selling tobacco products to to the people under 18. And this, we have 2 out of 3 tobacconists that are selling, that are not respecting actually this regulation. So we have a very big problem of the implementation of the law in France. And that's why we have to go further in the progressive complete ban on the selling tobacco products in France. And that's why we made also this campaign during the presidential election. And the second question, Beatrice, I'm sorry, I don't remember what was it.
Is there a political will to reduce the effect of secondhand smoke?
The secondhand smoke is also a very big question in France, because normally we also have a law stating that it is forbidden to smoke in public spaces. But actually, with the time, we had some decrees stating that, okay, it is forbidden to smoke in public, in collective spaces, but you can still smoke in semi-covered, semi-closed spaces, which is actually a nonsense. And that's why there is the willing from the government, but we still have a lot to do to make it effectively implemented in France. I hope I asked the question, answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. There was a question that was asked before the presentation, actually, from a registrant in India about implementation of tobacco policies. So how many countries, and I think this question would be addressed to Tanya if she can answer. How many countries in the world have been successful in implementing tobacco policies, and whether the effective enforcement of these policies has reduced the disease burden? Tanya, do you want to answer that question? If you...
Thank you, Beatrice. This is indeed a huge question. We have today 182 countries have ratified FCTC. That means a political will to implement the set of measures that are there to prevent smoke initiation, and to stimulate cessation, and to protect people from the harms of secondhand smoke, mainly, to provide alternatives to tobacco growers, that in Brazil is a problem. So there is a set of measures that are being implemented all over the world. And for the first time, since I started to work with tobacco control in the 90s, we can see a decrease in smoking prevalence. In some countries, like in Brazil, we have already the reduction of the effect of smoking in the rates of mortality of disease, like I presented, like lung cancer. In Brazil, we have a very clear decrease in the mortality for lung cancer among men, but not yet among women. There is a projection for the future because the women are now suffering the effects. There is a time lag of the effect of starting smoke to the. So there are a set of measures, and many countries have been done their job very well done. Here in Latin America, you have Uruguay, you have Chile, Panama, and many other countries, Mexico, doing very well their jobs and seeing the smoking prevalence decrease. But I don't know, until now, it's not from my knowledge now, if there is any study, global study showing the decrease of NCD's mortality linked to the smoking prevalence that is starting to decrease globally. So this is one very important issue. I don't know if I covered all the aspects of the question, but if not, I'm available to do if you have time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All these questions are extremely interesting. We are running out of time, so I think we can have one last question. This will be for Marion Catlin. A question from Masa Davidovic. First of all, fantastic campaign. How do we measure the impact of social media campaign Besides the outreach metrics, how can we know if it has an impact on smoking behavior?
Thank you. This is a very good question. And this is not actually so easy to measure the impact, but still we have some proven methods. And we have this post-test survey that we lead after each media campaign. At the time in 2022, we didn't have the budget to have a proper post-test with the Paul Institute and very strict methodology and so on. But now we have this post-test. And for example, in February this year, we made a post-test about a campaign showing how big tobacco is increasing social inequalities, especially in France. And through this post-test, you can know on a panel of 1,000 respondents, all anonymous and randomized, you can have an idea if your campaign was seen, what if it was liked, if it had an impact, if the objectives of the campaign was fulfilled. You can prepare the question with the Paul Institute and see what is the impact of the campaign. So what we've made and what I've presented was still a mini post-test on 300 respondents. And actually, yes, the figures we have coming out from these post-tests are really encouraging, and that it shows that it has an impact. But still, you cannot all really say in which measure it has an impact on the long-term effect, for example. Yes, it's not so easy, but we have tools.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we have to quit now. I saw that Robert offered a written answer to the question in the chat. Thank you very much. We'll now stop for a few minutes, and we'll reconvene at 14:15 our time to carry on the adventure on alcohol.
That's correct. See you in 6-7 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we will start our session in a few minutes. The second half of today's public event will be focusing on alcohol. And Dr. André Carvalho, who is a scientist in the Early Detection, Prevention and Infections branch, will be helping with the chairing of this session and introducing our contributors and also managing the questions. So again, if you can precede your questions with to Pubudu or to Kate or to Beatrice, this will help a lot. Thank you, and I will let André introduce our first speaker.
Hello, everyone. A pleasure to have all you here. We're now going to focus on alcohol, and I'm going to be calling our guest speakers. We're going to start by I speak a lecture from Beatrice Laub-Secretron, that has been the chair for the tobacco, and she's leading the handbooks here at IARC, and she's going to talk about the IARC handbook on cancer prevention regarding reduction of alcohol consumption. Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Share my screen.
Perfect.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. So the topic of my presentation will be the most recent IARC handbook of cancer prevention that we have conducted on alcohol control. So the IARC handbooks of cancer prevention evaluate interventions and strategies that aim to reduce cancer incidence and mortality at the population level. To this end, we convene a working group of international independent scientists with different expertise. And this working group performs comprehensive reviews and consensus evaluations of the interventions aiming at reducing cancer. Once the evaluations are performed, national and international health agencies use this evaluation to develop evidence-based interventions or policy recommendations for reducing cancer risk at the population level. So the IARC handbooks address different types of intervention and strategies. They can be either interventions for primary prevention, such as pre-chemo prevention or personal actions. They can be interventions of secondary prevention, such as for screening or for early diagnosis. And they can also be interventions, again, of primary prevention, but of the type of policies and public interventions, such as taxation policies and bans. So the process of review and evaluations is very thorough and transparent and go through a number of steps, from the review question to the selection of the literature, screening of the literature, extraction of the information, evaluation of the study quality, synthesis of the results, and finally, the consensus evaluation, which are a product of the working group of international experts convened at IARC. So, alcohol. Alcoholic beverages are carcinogenic, and the IARC monographs have evaluated their carcinogenicity at different organ sites. The most recent update dates from 2012, and in that volume, it was established that alcohol causes cancer of the oral cavity, of the pharynx, of the larynx, of the esophagus, of the breast, of the liver, and of the colorectum. The percentage or the proportion of cancers that are due to alcohol consumption can be seen in two ways. In sort of pink, grayish color, you have the population attributable fraction of alcohol-related cancer cases. That is for amongst all cancers that are caused by alcohol, this is the percentage that cause of cancers of the esophagus is the highest proportion, and the lip and oral cavity, followed by the pharynx, liver, larynx, colorectal, and breast. You see the proportion of cancers attributable to female breast is small, but because there is a high number of cancers of the breast and of the colorectal, you see in blue, for each of those cancer sites, the number of cancers attributable to alcohol is very high. So why do we have a handbook on alcohol prevention? Since alcohol is carcinogenic, we want to see whether there are ways to decrease its exposure in order to reduce the cancer risk. There was a very strong interest from WHO for us to produce a handbook of alcohol control, which follows the one we had already produced some years ago about tobacco control, where the first step was to review the evidence of the reversal of risk upon reduction or cessation of alcohol consumption, which will be followed by assessment of the policies for alcohol control. So here are a few words about the prevalence and the trend of alcohol use worldwide. And the reason why I've shown these maps is we know that some regions where the prevalence of current drinking is fairly high. Globally, it's 44%, with some regions with up to 60% of the population drinking, whereas in other regions, it's down to 4% in the EMRO region. However, when we looked at the per capita consumption amongst the drinkers, so among those who drink, how much do they drink? Then the map looks very differently. So there are some regions, for example, where the prevalence of drinking is very low, but the amount drunk per drinker is very high. And thus, the risk for cancer in those populations due to alcohol is very high. And in all alcohol indicators, men show a more detrimental drinking pattern than women. The time trends over time are very fairly clear, with a fairly steep decline, fairly mild decline in Europe, and some regions which have a very low trend. The global trend is fairly regular, with regions such as the Western Pacific region having seen a strong increase in the year 2010, and now a plateau and now decrease. The determinants of consumption are multiple. Sex and gender, with men drinking more than women. The age, with an initiation in the adolescence and a peak in the early 20s and decrease in the middle age. Factors such as the race, ethnicity, culture, and religion can have a substantial impact in the determinants of consumption, and also the socioeconomic status. Most important is the association with smoking. So people who smoke have a higher tendency to drink alcohol and to drink in higher amounts. What we were very much interested in this handbook, which was fairly new, as the determinants of consumption are usually well reported, there was very little data on the determinants of reduction of cessation. Why would people reduce their consumption, and why would people quit, which would maybe for different reasons? So the main reason for reducing is to preserve or to improve your health. And there is something that's called a sick quitter effect. If someone feels ill, then they may be more likely to quit, but it could be because they have already a cancer underlying. Again, as I said, people who smoke are more likely to drink, and people who don't smoke are more likely to quit. Then there are other elements in your life that make you reduce consumption, such as getting married or cohabitation, parenthood. And then there's also the influence of social networks and religion. Affordability is, of course, a very important, an important determinant of reduction or cessation, even though it has been shown that it's not the most salient item for someone to quit drinking. Interestingly, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a global-wide 10% decrease in alcohol consumption, which, however, we're now catching up on soon by next year. So the consumption will be back to what it was before COVID. So, as I said, the handbooks are a systematic review and assessment of the evidence linking reduction of alcohol consumption or cessation of alcohol consumption with reduction of cancer risk. So this is a table that shows you the type of data that the working group was brought to analyze in terms of, so for each of the cancers that we looked at, which are all the cancers that are associated with alcohol consumption, there was data either on reducing alcohol consumption or on the time, on the time since alcohol cessation, or simply on quitting without giving any timeline. And you see there was very little data on reducing alcohol consumption, so most of the evaluation are based on alcohol cessation. And the main challenges posed to the working group were that most study presented relative risk of the current versus never drinking, or former versus never drinking as the reference category. So what working group had to recalculate and to switch the thinking to compare former drinking with current drinking to see whether there was a decrease in the relative risk for cancer incidence. The interaction, the multiplicative interaction with tobacco smoking was also a main challenge, because the relative risk of alcohol in smokers is much higher than in non-smokers. So there was always the questions of a residual confounding with smoking when the study did not stratify by smoking or did not adjust specifically. And then for several organ sites, namely, for example, for breast and for colon, for breast, the increase in risk with alcohol drinking is very small. So it's all the more difficult to see a reduction with reduction or with cessation of risk. For the colon also, it seems that the increase in risk starts with at a higher consumption with esophagus also. So it was all the more difficult to see a reduction, particularly among moderate or light drinkers. So all the studies were reviewed and assessed for the strength of the evidence and put into one of the following category. There was either sufficient evidence that the cancer preventing association between the intervention, which is alcohol reduction, and the organ site was established, or there was limited evidence if the association is plausible, or the evidence was considered to provide inadequate evidence if no conclusion could be drawn from the association between reduction of adult alcohol consumption and the organ site. So this exercise was done for all 7 sites that alcohol are related to. Unfortunately, I cannot share the result with you because the data are under embargo until we have the data published. But please watch the IARC handbooks website, and where we'll post the result as soon as they're released. I also wanted to share with you, within the handbook, we have reviewed the data on the mechanisms. This is a very complicated slide to say the effect to show how alcoholic beverages can cause cancer. And then the challenge to the working group was to see whether there was any data on the effect of cessation on any intermediate biomarkers, so intermediate endpoints, on one of those mechanisms, to say that if this mechanism is reversed, then we can infer that there would be a reduction in the cancer risk. So of all these different pathways that ethanol can induce, the working group was able to identify a series of mechanistic endpoints. Most importantly, the metabolism of acetaldehyde, which is the first metabolite of alcohol, which is a very strong carcinogen. Effect on the endocrine system, most important for example, cancer of the breast. Epigenetic mechanism, effect on the microbiome, either the oral microbiome or the microbiome in the colon, both organs that are touched when that are in contact with alcohol. Then effects on the genotoxicity, oxidative stress, and the immune system. So for all of these different endpoints, the working group reviewed the evidence available and classified it into one of the criteria that I've shown you before. Again, I'm sorry, I can show you the data because it's under embargo. And with that, I just want to thank our team who's worked on this handbook and our sponsors, without which this would not be possible. Thank you very much. And I'll remain open to questions at the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, for a presentation. Following Beatrice's presentation, we're going to have Kate Allen presenting. She's a science and policy advisor at the World Cancer Research Fund International, and she's going to talk, giving an overview of the alcohol policy landscape. Katie, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks, Beatrice. So yes, I'm going to give a general kind of introduction to the alcohol policy landscape. And some of this has been touched on by Beatrice. Let me just move the window out of the way. So I work for a cancer prevention organisation, World Cancer Research Fund. So I'm coming at this from a cancer prevention perspective. And as we heard from Beatrice, there's strong evidence linking alcohol consumption with a number of different cancer types, and you can see them listed there. And so for that reason, one of our 10 World Cancer Research Fund recommendations focuses on alcohol. And basically the top line messaging of the recommendation is for alcohol, for cancer prevention, don't drink alcohol. And the reason is that there's, the evidence shows that there's no safe level of alcohol consumption. So even at low levels, there's still a risk. And the more alcohol you consume, the higher the risk. Doesn't matter what kind of alcohol you're drinking, whether it's whiskey or wine, because all alcohol contains ethanol, which breaks down into various carcinogens. And you saw some of that on Beatrice's slides, as well as the biological mechanisms, which are reasonably well understood, including DNA damage, preventing cells from maintaining and themselves, and also oxidative stress, as you heard. And so IARC classifies alcohol as a human carcinogen. In 2020, 4% of all new cancer cases were attributable to alcohol. So that's 740,000 cases of cancer that could have been prevented. So moving from the science kind of framing a bit more into the policy space, 3 points to make. There's still a low awareness and acceptance of the negative impact of alcohol. And this is not just from people in the street, your man in the street, but also decision makers, policymakers. And so there's a big awareness raising piece to be done around the impact of alcohol on health. There are a lot more plans and policies around alcohol in high income countries than there are in low middle income countries. And in the absence of a plan, of course, that makes it much more difficult to act in a coordinated and effective way. And then finally, alcohol is the only psychoactive and addictive substance that has significant health impact that doesn't have any kind of legally binding regulatory instrument around it. And that's largely because there's a lack of consensus in member states as to the need for this kind of instrument. So I won't spend any time on the next couple of slides in the interest of time, but at the international level, in terms of the international alcohol policy landscape, over the last 10 years or so, there have been quite a lot of strategies, targets, goals, initiatives Some of these are targeted at alcohol per se, and some of them at, for example, NCD prevention, a kind of wider context of that. Most recently, WHO launched its action plan to effectively implement the global strategy to reduce the harmful use of alcohol as a public health priority. But they've done that to kind of accelerate progress because it's been sort of relatively slow. And the same applies at the European level. So over the last sort of 10, 15 years, there have been various plans and forums and action plans to reduce alcohol use. And most recently at the European level, alcohol policies or alcohol is handled via the Sustainable Development Goals and also the Europe Beating Cancer Plan. But the point is that despite all of these plans and strategies, progress has still been fairly slow. And there are a number of challenges that kind of feed into that. Some of them are unique to alcohol, and some of them are common to other policy areas, and those are the ones that are circled. So other areas like nutrition. So terminology is one of the challenges, and I already just used the terminology when I mentioned the WHO action plan on the reduction of the harmful use of alcohol. So that implies that there is a harmless use of alcohol. And from a cancer perspective, that's certainly just not true. There are also phrases like responsible drinking. So that puts the onus kind of firmly on the individual and ignores the context, the wider environment within which that individual makes their decisions. And then there are terms like moderate drinking, which sounds good. But again, from a cancer perspective, there is no safe level of consumption. So the terminology around cancer, around alcohol, can be problematical, as can mixed messages around alcohol. And these are often promoted by industry and by the media, who kind of cherry pick messages to suit particular agendas, including how good alcohol can be for us and all the different health benefits of alcohol. So that can muddy the waters and, again, create confusion. Strong cultural norms is a challenge. So in many areas of the world, particularly Europe, drinking is very, very culturally acceptable. And the thought of going out on a Friday or a Saturday night with your friends, having fun, relaxing, and not having alcohol as an integral part of that is quite foreign to, just doesn't come into people's thinking. So that can make it seem as if alcohol can be a bit untouchable, and that can lead to policy inertia. And then a fourth challenge is understanding the impact of low and no alcoholic drinks. So this is still a relatively new area. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done in this area. There is evidence that these beverages reduce purchasing and consumption of alcohol, but there's also a school of thought that they act as a gateway to higher alcohol consumption. So the jury's still out on low alcohol in various respects. They also provide a kind of space for the alcohol industry to kind of reconfigure itself to be part of the solution, if you like. And then turning to the two challenges that are common to nutrition policy, cognitive dissonance among policymakers. So the idea of holding two kind of opposing ideas in your head at the same time and how to reconcile that. So policymakers may recognize that alcohol is damaging, has a public health impact, but at the same time, they drink themselves, or they may genuinely feel the economic benefits of alcohol are very important. So squaring these kind of competing priorities can be problematical. And then the role and influence of the alcohol industry. We've heard a lot about the tobacco industry. The alcohol industry is no different. So it employs a lot of tactics to delay processes, to do everything it can to prevent development of policy. The alcohol industry is very powerful. It has access to political spaces and can even be involved in the setting of policy, which of course is a big conflict of interest. So there are challenges, but there are opportunities as well. So there's a strong financial case to be made for a comprehensive policy package around alcohol, with every dollar invested yielding an up to $16 return on investment. And being able to make a strong economic case is always good with policymakers. There are lessons learned from other unhealthy commodity industries like the food industry with nutrition policy. So the tactics that the food industry used, denying the evidence, delaying the setting of policy processes, dividing people's opinion, these are all things that the alcohol industry does too. And so lessons can be learned from how to combat that around the nutrition policy space and transferred into alcohol. The body of evidence around policy and cost effectiveness is strengthening. So for example, WHO recently updated their best buys, which includes alcohol, and also brought out last year a series of policy briefs around alcohol, which are helpful. And of course, the first thing a policymaker always likes to hear is what works, what's effective, and who's done what. In some areas of the world, alcohol consumption is declining. So for example, in Europe, younger populations, consumption is declining. And that's probably because younger people are more aware of the health impact of alcohol, and also the impact of alcohol on mental health, which has a lot more attention now than perhaps used to be the case. And it's likely that younger people who drink less alcohol turn into older people who drink less alcohol. And so you start to get a demographic shift. And then there's also evidence that implementing alcohol policy can contribute to reducing social and health inequalities. And of course, it's people in the lowest socioeconomic groups that are hardest hit by alcohol consumption and all the ramifications associated with that. And then finally, the COVID-19 pandemic, which shone a light on all sorts of areas, including alcohol, and just brought to the attention of governments, more importantly, the importance of including, for example, an alcohol dimension in future pandemic preparedness plans or public health emergency plans. So I'm just going to wrap up with some key takeaways to guide policy engagement in the alcohol space. And these are very much our World Cancer Research Fund key takeaways. So it's important to build capacity and networks to work in partnerships with others, because that helps to amplify your voice, and it helps to get things done where it might be more difficult to do on your own. And from a policymaker's perspective, it's a lot easier to deal with a unified civil society that are kind of singing from the same song sheet than having to deal with lots of different fragmentary messages that are coming from different directions. It's important to apply lessons from what we've learned in the nutrition area to alcohol, and we've identified 4 in particular, so marketing and advertising, taxation, labelling, and availability. So for us, it's going to be important to monitor the effectiveness of policies in those areas, to really call out where we see it, industry interference and conflict of interest, to support the development of technical guidance, for example, for member states to help them very transparently manage conflict of interest, and to monitor progress in that new WHO Global Action Plan that's designed to accelerate progress. 2030 isn't very far away, so it's going to be important to see, does it really accelerate progress? And if so, how is that working? Which countries are doing well, which are not, and so on. And then for us as an organisation, it's really important to continue to work about changing that perception of alcohol consumption and cancer risk, to reinforce the message that for cancer prevention, there is no safe level of consumption, and to move away from the terminology of the harmful use of alcohol and just use alcohol use or alcohol consumption. So thank you very much. For those of you who are on the course, there is a handout that you'll be able to get, and that has a lot more information around the area, and it has links to all of the documents that are in the slides, and also links to WCRF alcohol related resources. So I'll end there, and thank you very much. I'm just looking at how to stop sharing.
Yeah, Kate, thank you so much for your presentation. We are moving to our last presentation on the topic, and then we're going to follow with question and answers. So I'd like to invite Pugudu Sumanasakara. He's a visiting lecturer at the University of Colombo and a vice president for the Movement International. We're going to present a lecture on effective community interventions and policy development in low and middle income countries. Take Sri Lanka as an example. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi, hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting Thanks, organizers, for organizing this important seminar. So my input today for this session is effective community interventions and the policy development in low and middle income countries. So I will take Sri Lanka as an example at the end of my presentation. I have a small issue with moving the slides.
Sometimes you need to click twice, maybe.
Yeah. It's not really working. So
okay, I can share your slides if you
it's really nice if you can do that, because
yes.
It seems now it's working, it seems. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So basically low and middle income countries, the problem is the development. So when it comes to alcohol harm is obstacle to achieving the sustainable development goals. The 14 out of 17 SDGs are affected by alcohol. And this is the only substance that causes more harm to others than to the users themselves. So there are very few substances like this in the world. The total alcohol harm is nearly double that of tobacco sometimes if you really calculate. It is because of many reasons, because of the social harm done by alcohol. And in the Southeast Asia, what we can see is that there's a kind of 29% increase in per capita alcohol use since 2010. And the policy versus community action. So here, because there's a kind of, shifting because policy development, community action. So my opinion is that this should go hand in hand. And the policies are not that respected in low and middle income countries as the wealthy part of the world. So therefore, the community understanding of the issue, the problem, and the remedies are very, very important. And the strong community action through civil society or any other organization that accelerate the policy process. And the policies that are established through the community involvement, what we can see in the world is that easy to enforce than policies coming from top levels. And the development and the implementation of policies, we know it takes time. So Sri Lanka, as an example, it took 14 years and working with 4 governments to make the policy done in the parliament. But until that, through the community action, we can actually achieve many things through the community action. So LMICs have not implemented comprehensive set of alcohol policies yet. Many countries are failing to implement best buys. Best buys, I mean the WHO recommended best buys for alcohol policies. And at the same time, the LMICs are more likely to have weaker policies. It is because of the industry influence, which I will tell you later. And when it comes to the availability measures, which are very important for LMICs, less than 1/3 of the countries have regulations on outlet density, days of sales, such as that. And how the alcohol industry influence the LMICs, there are a few summarized here, few points summarized here. They buy politicians, sometimes they buy political parties through the election period. And the industry, they lobby for worsening of existing policies. They are not only blocking the new development, they are lobbying for the worsening of the current policies too. And the kind of opportunistic interventions, such as during COVID-19, maybe in the economic crisis periods, they are very, very mastered that. And they use research agencies. If they can't use research agencies, sometimes they buy local researchers to establish false facts and figures. And all the time, they exaggerate the issue of illegal alcohol market. As an example, in Sri Lanka, the real illegal alcohol market, it is less than 10%, but industry talks all the time about 40%, 50%, 60% of the illegal market in the country. And they attack and weaken the policy development efforts in the LMICs. I will give you an example here. In 2018, the Transport Ministry Cambodia signed MOU with the Asia Pacific International Wine and Spirit Alliance. So what they got was like around $100,000 to promote drink, don't drive campaign. But the real intention of the industry was to access and use to block the development of the alcohol law. They are coming in a kind of camouflage of helping the governments, but their real intention is to buckle the policies. And the typical industry claims in LMICs for the politician and the policymakers, that is, standard alcohol drinks should be available for poor people for affordable price. They consider this as a kind of essential thing for people. And when there's a tourism industry, they always say that to develop tourism industry, that there needs more alcohol outlets for tourists to drink freely. And they are always exaggerating the excise tax. I will give you an example later. And when it comes to the policy development, I think the previous speaker also covered this area. It is not just preventing, it is a kind of investment for LMICs. And that is the second highest return on investment for a government, that is to prevent alcohol and develop policies. But to get such a kind of result, that the three best buys should be implemented. That is increasing prices through the excise taxation, decreasing the physical availability, and comprehensively restricting or banning alcohol advertising, sponsorships, and the promotions. So I can give you a few examples from Thailand, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Vietnam, and Kenya, and Botswana. The LMICs who implement alcohol policies, it doesn't mean that they actually solve all the problems or the policies are really the best ones, but the efforts are really working. So if you work hard, so you can yield a kind of better results. The Sri Lankan experience, this is just a demographic data point to understand the country. And when it comes to the prevalence, the consumption, state of the consumption, the majority are lifetime abstainers. And there are last 30-day abstainers too. So you can see from the population, the lesser number of people are really drinking alcohol. And when it comes to the consumption time, the spirit, the liquor, the arak is the highest. And then it comes to the beer. The toddy is a kind of culturally historical brewed one from the coconut tree. And the kasipu is the illegal one. So the real economic impact of alcohol use to Sri Lanka today is 60 million Sri Lankan rupees. I have given the USD figure also for you to understand it. And I actually shared this document with the organizers, that is the economic and the social cost of tobacco and alcohol in Sri Lanka. The cost of really a high number. When it comes to the numbers, that it is really high when it comes to the cost, and you can actually refer the document. And I told you that the industry always exaggerate the tax income of alcohol, but if you really calculate it, the daily tax revenue of alcohol income and socio-economic cost, the cost is higher than the daily income from alcohol tax. So always alcohol and tobacco industries both exaggerate their income to the governments. If you take the Sri Lankan example from 2018, so the 89% of the tax collected from other taxes. Alcohol is 6%, tobacco is 5%, altogether 11%. But through the media, they are always telling that the governments in LMICs are running because of the taxes collected from alcohol and tobacco. So when it comes to the prevalence trend in the country from 2012 to 2021, so we can see a kind of slight declining of it. It is because of the many efforts of the policy development as well as the community action. So in Sri Lanka, we call it Act number 27 of 2006, the National Authority on Tobacco and Alcohol. So there are key findings are here from the Act. The definition of alcohol product is any product containing 1% or more pure alcohol. Selling alcohol for under 21 is prohibited and the seller is liable. Print and electronic media advertisements are completely banned. Pre-offers, vending machines are banned. And sponsorships for cultural, educational, and sports events are also banned. So I also shared this document, the Sri Lanka, the NATA Act, so you can refer to that later. So the approach as a country that we used, I can summarize like this: deglamorize alcohol is because alcohol is a dull chemical marketed through a kind of unethical industry tactics. So the glamorizing is one big factor, and the counteract the industry promotions all the time as much as possible. And the changing norm is a very big part because the norm established the alcohol culture. And there are lots of myths around alcohol in our countries, and we have to correct it for the people's mindset. The community intervention, policy advocacy, and the research is essential. And the work is mostly based on the total population approach, and as and when necessary, the target group, a specific kind of interventions can be carried out. And the health promotion principles and the approach is always followed. And the mobilize every single structure in the community, whether it is formal or informal, is very, very essential. And there are some pictures of the community action done by young people and other community groups. And changing norm is the big part of it, and especially for young people in a very modern and attractive ways. So the learnings from the Sri Lanka as an LMIC for development of policies and the community action, I can summarize like this. We do not have to wait until the perfect policy is made. So youth of a country can be a very powerful source that can be effectively mobilized to take care of public health policies and the community action. While there are some policies that can be established easily, there are some actually will be bitterly foretold. And it is important that actions are not based on what we like, what we know, and what we find easy to do, but it's based on evidence, and the movement is in the right direction is very, very important. And the importance of networking among like-minded agencies are very, very important. And there are challenges. Those challenges can be converted to an opportunities too. Thank you very much. So you can get much more information from the ADIC Sri Lanka ORG website, ADIC website, and the Movendi International website. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you so much for for sharing this experience from Sri Lanka. We now have about 5 or 10 minutes for questions before finalizing the session. So I see there was one question that I guess was put early on about, what is the limit for consuming alcohol safely, and I think everybody, touched the base that there is no safe limit, right? That is best if you do not consume alcohol. There is another question, maybe Beatrice can start, is that, how the reduction of alcohol consumption, how that's evaluated, and what we're talking here, right? When it's significant, maybe, when you say, reducing 10% versus reducing 50%, or, it's kind of what you call a significant or a clinical significant reduction of alcohol consumption. Beatrice.
Thank you for the question. A very interesting one. And we have deceivingly little information on that. So as I said in my presentation, among all the studies that assess the reduction in risk with either reduction or cessation of alcohol consumption, the large majority was about cessation or time since cessation, and there was little information about reduction. Now, how is reduction measured, and reduction from how much to how much? So each study, the studies being conducted in different countries. The concept of high, moderate, and low is not the same in the same country. The amount that would be high in one country would be considered as low in another one. And the study did not always give equate this qualitative with numbers in terms of grams of alcohol per day or per week. Also, an important factor was most of the study did not have information on the consumption of during drinking of the former drinkers, how much did they drink? So that also affects the reduction in risk a lot. And finally, I want to say that we have made an evaluation, I would say, whether there is a reduction, but the evaluation is qualitative, and we have not tried to measure the percentage it would require, percentage reduction it would require to have a significant reduction. All we can say is that if you reduce your risk, or if you reduce your consumption, or if you quit drinking, then there is a clear effect on the reduction of a cancer risk. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. There is also one question for Kate Allen. It's about the SAFER, how you see the SAFER getting the same, strategic and help that the Empower did for tobacco. This is an initiative from WHO that's kind of new. If you could, update where it is now and how that's going to be deployed compared to the Empower strategy. Thank you.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Yes, so the question, you comment about the SAFER, right? The WHO initiative for alcohol control. And for tobacco, we have the framework, but also the Empower, right? That measures what's happening in terms of tobacco control. So the idea is that, as the SAFER is kind of a new initiative, in which stage it is and how WHO, is looking for deploying this as something that really measures, controls and evaluate the alcohol control.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that right off the top of my head, I'm not able to answer. I could certainly go away and respond to the person who's come up with the question. I don't know if there's anyone else on the panel who could respond to that. But happy to respond later to the questioner if they could get in contact with me.
No, sounds good. Thank you so much. There is one more question about to Beatrice about commenting on synergistic mechanism of carcinogen on alcohol and tobacco. How's the synergism in terms of causing cancer?
The synergy between tobacco and alcohol is well known, and it acts in different ways. The most important is that alcohol acts as a solvent for alcohol and the metabolites of alcohol, namely acetaldehyde in the body. So there's very strong evidence that when you are a smoker, acetaldehyde is formed, whenever you drink, acetaldehyde is formed directly in the mouth already by the action of the oral microbiome. And if you're a smoker, the oral microbiome is altered. And if you're a smoker and you drink, the amount of acetaldehyde in your mouth when you drink will be 7 times higher than that one of a non-smoker. And so for every sip of alcohol, you have a peak of for every peak of alcohol drinking, you have a peak of acetaldehyde among smokers, which is much higher than among non-smokers. And the effect of solvent of alcohol acts in on all organ sites, but the interaction is particularly strong in the oral cavity.
Thank you so much. So we are getting to the end of, sorry, there's one more, and then we're gonna share, is there any studies about age factor in alcohol consumption?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to, I mean, there are large variations in the patterns of drinking between different, countries, regions, settings, and so on. In some countries, drinking starts very young and then would decrease in the early 20s. In other countries, it will stay up and then decrease at an older age. In some countries, drinking increases at an older age. In other countries, it decreases. So I have tried to highlight the principal determinants of consumption, making aware that on top of sex and age, the social norm, the cultural values, religions, and social and economic status all have a strong impact. It's a very complex interplay, and it varies a lot between regions and settings.
Thank you so much. I'd like again to thank the panelists for the presentations and answer the questions. And Sandrine, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andre. I would like to thank also all the panelists today. Dr. Tania Calvacante, Dr. Robert Bronston, Marion Catlin, Dr. Fezul Edzwan Mustafa, of course, Dr. Kate Allen, and Dr. Poboudou, Soumana Sekara, and finally, Beatrice Lobi-Secretan, and yourself, Andre, for the great chairing of the session. I will just finish with a small slide for our participants, but also for our viewers on YouTube. You may want to attend the next public event, which is tomorrow, on diet and cancer by Dr. Mark Gunta. The session on YouTube will now close. Thank you very much for viewing, and I will keep all our participants for a last announcement. Thank you. Okay, for our participants in the summer school, I would just like to remind you that tomorrow is the last day for you to submit your individual assignment on the online space. It is important that you all do it. As you know, these activities are mandatory in this part 1. You need also to register for our last live session in part 1, which will be on Friday, when you will have the opportunity to present the last slide of your individual assignment to your group members during the last live session of part 1 and before we all meet in Lyon very soon. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. And good luck with the assignments. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.